Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Continuing this teaching, Dependent Origination Dhamma Talk number 4, called Feeling Conditions Desire. This is chapter 25 of volume 3 of the Luang Por Sumedho anthology of teachings. So these were talks given in 1988. Our normal breathing is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It's neither attractive nor unattractive. That's why you have to pay attention to it, because if the breath were attractive, it would attract you, and I wouldn't have to say, "Watch your breath." You'd be watching it anyway, because it was so attractive. Breathing is the most important physiological function, and the body does it, whether we're aware of it or not. Whether we're crazy or sane, young or old, male or female, rich or poor, or whatever. Breathing is this way. It's neither exciting or interesting, nor is it disgusting or revolting. But as we concentrate, bring our attention to breathing of the body, what happens? Well, when I concentrate on my breath, the mind goes tranquil. I feel tranquilized by being able to concentrate on the breathing of this body. Anapanasati is boring to most people at first. Just inhalation, exhalation, the same old thing. The breathing of the body is neutral Vedana. So when we do the meditation of sweeping through the feeling of the body, the pressure of the body sitting on the seat and the clothes touching the skin, that's neutral feeling. Then we can observe the Vedana through the ear, the nose, the tongue, the eye, the body, the mind, and we start to see that this is just the sensory realm, not a person, just the way it is. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing bad about it at all. Vedana is all right. There's just the pleasant and the painful and the neutral. They're just what they are. However, to be aware of pleasure, pain and neutral Vedana means that we have to bear it, really accept it, rather than just reacting to it. We reflect on it, contemplate it, so that we really understand it. If we don't contemplate and have insight into Vedana, we just continue this process of paticca samuppada. So we have desires, because Vedana conditions tanha, desire. But with insight, we can break the habit. We can contemplate Vedana. Then we begin to understand how desire arises, wanting the pleasure, not wanting the pain, and just ignoring the neutral. This is Luang Por talking particularly about neutral feeling and using the cycles of the breath. And as he points out later on in the talk that probably 98% of our life is neutral feeling and only 2% is pleasant and painful. And so it's one of the reasons why we make such a particular effort in Buddhist practice of cultivating awareness of a neutral feeling, like the rhythm of the breath. It's not exciting, it's not compelling, it's not something that catches our attention unless we've got some kind of breathing problem or the air is filled with smoke or something, then we notice it. But it takes a certain amount of effort to bring attention to neutral feeling and to sustain attention upon that. So that's a particular kind of work that we're doing, because as our instinctual process is conditioned, it's like the result of our animal body and the very ancient instinctual processes of living and the having an organic physical body as we do, then the attention goes to what's pleasant and what's painful. And if things are neutral, then we tend to switch off or ignore them or find some other kind of distraction. So the Buddha emphasizes this quality of bringing attention to the ordinary, to to sustain the quality of mindfulness, as Luang Por Sumedho would also often repeat as a sort of motto for Amaravati: mindfulness is the path to the deathless, heedlessness is the path to death. The mindful never die, the heedless are as if dead already. That's the sort of national motto for the deathless realm. the Dhammapada, I think it's verse number 21 of the Dhammapada. And so it's very easy, but particularly if most of our life is indeed neutral feeling, for us to drift into being unmindful, to say, if it's not exciting or it's not irritating, it's not compelling, then just sort of switching off and letting our attention drift away, then we're missing most of our life. We're not there for our own life, and so the exercise of bringing attention to neutral feeling, and not just the breathing, but also the motion of the body walking on the ground, the feeling of our feet meeting the ground as we walk, just the ordinary everyday sensations. So much of the forest tradition practice is around that, bringing attention, developing mindfulness of the body, sitting, standing, walking, lying down, coming, going. And ordinary, everyday, unremarkable activities, and that's in a way the principal tool that we use to cultivate our ongoing mindfulness. And so then we're actually present for our own life, and to be then able to work with life and to use that each moment as an opportunity to awaken to the reality of things, so that. It's a kind of going against the current of a society and our ordinary conditioning. If something is not special, if it's boring, then it doesn't have any value. You can ignore it. But the encouragement is to rather than ignoring the neutral, to deliberately bring attention to that, to the ordinary, and to realize that as I like to point out, the word Dhamma is there in Dhammata, which means that which is natural or familiar. In the Thai language, the word Thamada means ordinary or natural, nothing special. But it's based upon the Pali word Dhammata, of the nature of Dhamma. So right there in the word for ordinary is the Dhamma, so that when we say don't switch off or just ignore the everyday activities that say the sitting, standing, walking, lying down, the rhythm of the breath, the rhythm of our footsteps, and so on and so forth, the coming of day and night, the changing of the seasons and the patterns of light and dark and so on, completely unremarkable. It's not special that the sun comes up in the morning and in this part of the day there's light and the other half of the day it's dark. It's not special. But when we bring attention to that, then that is the gateway to the realization of Dhamma. And so that in a way, mindfulness of neutral feeling is a really essential quality of the practice, and that is something that every hour, every minute of the day we can develop. If we as long as we see the value in that, then we will put the effort and energy into, say, developing that attention, and then seeing the results of that. If you're watching, if you're aware, if you're paying attention to your life moment by moment, then you realize that that's also, it's when we pay attention that we can also bring about the ending of dukkha, that it's because of not paying attention, because of ignorance, switching off, being distracted. That's where we unconsciously follow our impulses of chasing after what we like and complaining about or criticizing and creating negativity to things that we dislike. So any thoughts, questions? Roman, you have a question? If you can use the microphone, please.
Thank you, Ajahn. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the difference between equanimity and indifference, because it seems sometimes a bit dicey to keep it on the equanimity side and not drifting to indifference, when I think of the Buddha, I think that basically he had to be convinced to teach. Well, that's how the story goes, at least, right? And so, in my mind, he would have been indifferent to being killed. If someone came around the corner, he wouldn't have clung to his life. But at the same time, he had this great compassion, this ocean of compassion. So I wonder how that works together and how we can prevent ourselves from drifting into indifference, from equanimity.
Yeah, good question. Well, it's one of those Pali words. Upekkha is the Pali word, and it's one of those words that doesn't really have a perfect English counterpart. So equanimity, in English, it comes across as a sort of emotional flatness. So in a way, it can be quite close to indifference. And you do have a few places in the Pali Canon where it uses the word, as far as I know, I couldn't tell you exactly where they are, but I understand it's the case that upekkha does actually mean indifference. It's like a not caring. But mostly upekkha is it's a Brahma Vihara. It's the most refined of the 4 Brahma Viharas. So it's a great brightness of the heart. And a number of years ago, Luang Por Sumedho started using the word serenity. Do you know the word serenity? Yeah. So serenity as an alternative translation, because equanimity has got a kind of bland flatness to it, where kindness and compassion have a tone of kind of expansiveness or sympathetic joy. There's a brightness to it. Equanimity seems like a bit of a letdown. Like, oh. But it's in terms of the Brahma Viharas, like usually in the Buddha's lists, the last one on the list is the most refined or the most, subtle. And so that equanimity, upekkha, is the 10th of the 10 paramitas. It's the 4th of the 4 Brahma Viharas. It's the 7th of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So on all those lists, it's the most refined of the factors of enlightenment. It's the most sort of refined of the 4 Brahma Viharas. It's the final the paramita in the list of 10 paramitas. So it's if you reflect upon it in that way, then it's not just a brightness, it's kind of almost like the most sort of substantial, pervasive, and liberating of the 4 Brahma Viharas. So in that sense, it's really a mistake to think of it as the same thing as indifference. And so that there's also, I believe, there's somewhere where the Buddha says, in terms of conditioned states, again, I don't have a reference for this, but somewhere he says something like, in terms of conditioned states of mind, then upekkha is the closest to nibbana. As nibbana is an unconditioned quality of mind. But in terms of conditioned qualities, things that begin and end and so on, then upekkha is sort of like a sort of close comparison, or a sort of a near in its quality to that great peacefulness and expansiveness, spaciousness of nibbana. So it's a very exalted and beautiful, noble quality in that respect. So one of the ways of talking about or developing upekkha, if you're familiar with the chanting, then there's a particular chant that we do with respect to the Brahma Viharas, and which is ahang sukhito homi, may I abide in well-being, and then may everyone abide in well-being. And then the second part is karuna, may all beings be released from all suffering. Then the third one is mudita, may all beings not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. And then the last one, when it talks about the development of upekkha, it changes gear because it's talking about cause and effect. I'm the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. So the reflection that supports the development of upekkha is really seeing things in terms of the natural order, in terms of cause and effect. So it's so that's one way of developing it. So there's an evenness of attitude. It's like, well, of course, this is the cause, this is the effect. Nothing has gone wrong. It's nature works this way. So that is not necessarily, and it's not an indifference, which it would indicate a kind of shutting down or not caring, but rather it's an evenness of heart, or an openness of heart, of attitude, that is recognizing, oh, nature works this way, how could it be otherwise? And so it's got that quality of, say, all-encompassing acceptance. The other thing about upekkha, when talking about it, I like to speak of it myself in terms of it's the heart's response to agitation or turbulence. That in your heart, which can be completely still, irrespective of the amount of activity and busyness, turbulence going on around you. So rather like the center of the spinning wheel, or the center of the cyclone, of the hurricane, there's the eye of the storm, is things are very still. So upekkha can be that quality of inner stillness in the midst of a lot of activity. It doesn't mean that activity is suppressed or is ignored, but there's a centeredness in the midst of that activity, so that despite all the agitation and turbulence, the heart is unshaken in the face of that. There's there's a lot you can say about upekkha. A few years ago, Ajahn Punadhammo and I, he's the abbot of the little monastery in Ontario, Arrow River Hermitage, and we were invited to do a study weekend at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies. And somebody said, "Oh, could you do a weekend on upekkha?" I said, "A whole weekend on upekkha? What's there to say about upekkha?" Yeah. Well, okay. Well, we'll probably run out of the topic, but we can come up with something to fill out the hours. When we started looking into it, both of us found like, wow, a weekend's not going to be enough. There was a lot of different dimensions to it, without going into too much detail, speaking of that quality of centeredness, there's a Pali word, a long Pali word called tatra majatata, which means in the middle of thatness. So that's another of the aspects of upekkha, is like that being in the middle, being centered. And so that image of the center of the cyclone, or the eye of the hurricane, that tatra majatata, in the middle of that, so that upekkha is being at the center of things and being unshaken in that kind of centeredness. Does that make sense? So as for the newly enlightened Buddha being okay with someone coming along and killing him, I think that's in the realm of your imagination. He probably also had realized that nobody can deliberately take the life of a Tathagata. It's impossible. A fully enlightened Buddha can't be killed. Some of them can shed their blood, but they can't die by violence, according to the Buddhist mythology. So I think it's probably not very profitable for you to sort of go into that projection of what the Buddha would feel or wouldn't feel. Because also that that time he was seeing that the subtlety of what he had awakened to, and the difficulty of conveying that understanding to a kind of population of beings that were addicted to becoming, to bhava tanha, then there was that sense of it's too impossible a task. But then when the Brahma Sahampati came along and said, well, look, there's some beings with a lot of dust in their eyes and some beings with very little dust in their eyes, and the Buddha was immediately responded to that and said, oh yes, that's a good point. And so then that motivated him to be teaching for the next 45 years. So anyway, I mean, you can use your imagination as you choose, but I wouldn't want to guess that the Buddha would have been indifferent, quote unquote, if somebody came along and said, I'm going to kill you. I think, well, I would just park that particular imaginative stream. It's not been something very, very helpful to think in terms of. Second guessing what the Buddha would think or wouldn't think is not very helpful, I find myself. So that the indifference, the way we use the word in English, is really it's like a vibhava tanha. It's a shutting down. It's like an I don't care. So there's a numbing that's going on, and so that there's like a deliberate sort of attachment to not feeling. So there's a choice to disconnect. So I would say that's a very it is a kind of upekkha, but it's a very coarse and worldly kind of upekkha, and one that's going to bring more suffering, because you can only stay numb for so long, and then the numbness wears off, and that the effects of trying to switch off and keep things away, that can only last for a certain amount of time, and then we end up feeling things. At least in my experience, we end up feeling a lot of things anyway. So the that kind of indifference, it's and it's why I feel a lot of reasons why people drink or use prescription drugs or non-prescription drugs to sort of flatten their emotions, to not feel. That's to forget, to not feel, and that's in that effort to be indifferent, to not care. That's a lot of the reason why we drink, alcohol and use drugs to try and stop that. But again, you can only drink so much, and then you still keep feeling. Or the drugs can only work for a certain amount of time, and then they wear off, and the system is still sensitive, I would say. And so that kind of numbing is not an ending of suffering. It's a sort of temporary pausing, like using an opiate to numb the pain if you've got an injury. It can numb painful feelings temporarily, but it can't possibly be a long-term or a comprehensive solution. So that equanimity, I feel that, and one of the things when talking about upekkha, I find most often I'm reminding people it's a great brightness. So using the word equanimity really it's not very helpful. So it's like a great brightness of the heart. Yes, there's a quality of serenity there, and not being shaken or not being upset by things. But that's not from an emotional flattening or a numbness. It's a great spacious brightness. And so I tend to find that when I'm asked to explain it, then it's that sense of being at the center of things, that tattramajatata, that sort of, and that so you're not suppressing or switching off from the whirl of activity, but rather there's that centeredness of being in the middle of it and letting the world spin around you, or whirl around, WHIRL, to let the things whirl around you. There's a particular sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha talks about equanimity based on diversity, equanimity based on unity, and equanimity based on atamayata, on non-identification, or not made of thatness. And so if you're interested, that's a useful teaching to look up. And so that it's talking about the varieties of equanimity. So the first kind of equanimity is being still in the face of a lot of different variety. And then it's then the equanimity or the upekkha is then so it's that being in the midst of a lot of things and not being shaken or disturbed by that. And then it's sort of with increasing wisdom, increasing clarity, then it's equanimity based on unity, is that there's a sense of letting go of the variety of different objects, and just equanimity, just as, in a sense, being in that quality of awareness, knowing, oh, that's just the field of experience. So not focusing on the detail, but just being aware that, here is the subject, there is the object, this is the awareness, here's the field of activity going on. So there's a unity in terms of perception. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then the third level, equanimity based on atamayata, if you remember, so atamayata literally means not made of that. So it's that the perfection or the fulfillment of equanimity is there is no that. It's like the letting go of the whole subject-object duality. So that there's in that particular sutta, that's described as a sort of the culmination or the perfection of upekkha is in that. So it's a state of great clarity and great wisdom, and a letting go of the whole subject-object duality. So, as I said, I did a whole weekend on on upekkha. There's a lot that's there, but it's a so there's different dimensions to it. But I feel gives you some leads into that area. Okay, so to continue. A person who lives a very fast life has a life based on going from one exciting, thrilling thing to the next. When we think of really exciting lifestyles, what's usually involved? Usually they're full of frantic attempts to have a fantastic sensual experience, always running about. Because yesterday's fantastic sensual experience is boring. There's a need to have new sensual experiences, new romances and adventures, because anything becomes boring when it's repeated. So samsara is the cycle, the endless running about looking for the next interesting thing, the next excitement, the next romance, the next adventure, the next. Notice how insidious that is in our lives. Even in the monastic life, even in a meditation retreat, we can still be caught up in trying to get onto the next thing, sitting here thinking about what we'll do after the retreat, or trying to find something to make our lives more interesting here at Amaravati. I'm sure that hasn't crossed anybody's mind. What is interest? Things that are interesting are things that are attractive and hold our attention. We want to be attracted by something. We want attractive things, pleasurable experiences, beautiful objects, beautiful music and sounds. They are interesting. They hold our attention. They please and fascinate us. If an experience is unpleasant, we dread it. For most people, the idea of having to be in some place where there's nothing beautiful, dreary, boring people, gross, coarse and bad odors, men and women who have no culture, disgusting, foul, stinking, evil brutes, pain, sickness, can be a hell realm. We dread that this is what we might end up with. It might happen that we get stuck in some miserable place, so we want to avoid and get rid of all of that, and then try to get hold of as many pleasant experiences as possible. And yet, most of our lives are neither pleasant nor painful Vedana. When you contemplate most of your life, I'm sure that for most of you, about 98% has been neither pleasant nor painful. When I think of my life, about 2% has been highly pleasant or highly painful, and about 98% has been neither pleasant nor painful, but just what it is. And yet that 98% of one's life can go by totally unnoticed because we're so attached to the extremes of waiting for the next thing, longing and expecting and hoping, and then dreading and fearing the possibility of not having any more pleasure, not having a good time. Well, just think of our day here at Amaravati, or anywhere in the world. How much of it is really pleasurable or painful? The Buddha advised us to bring our attention to the neither pleasant nor painful things in life, because to accept and notice neither pleasure nor pain, so the Pali for that is adukkama sukha, neither pleasure nor pain, means we have to be attentive and alert. If something is not attractive or repulsive, it doesn't make us react. It doesn't stimulate our minds at all. So we have to bring our attention to it, be awake to it. That's why in meditation we sit, we stand, we walk, we lie down. 4 basic postures, normal breathing, things that are so ordinary but are not pleasurable nor painful. The practice of mindfulness is to bring our attention to Vedana, but we're not attaching to neutrality either. We're not trying to attach to either pleasure or pain. So, to study Vedana, we're not trying to live a neutral existence, but bringing attention to it means that we have to put effort into just sitting, standing, walking, lying down. Being awake, being here and now. We have to pay attention. We have to learn to concentrate the mind. So in one of John Lennon's songs, he was slightly misquoting Samuel Johnson, the famous English writer. He said, "Life is something that happens while we're making other plans." So it's very easy to miss our own life. I mean, I'm not reading anybody's mind, so how did he know? Because that's what most of us do. Life is something that happens while we're making other plans. So we can be so busy planning and revisiting the past and off in our invented mental world that we miss the people that we're with, the things that we're doing, and that life passes us by. We're not actually present for our own life. And so, as I was saying earlier, and what Luang Por's saying here now, is that 98% of our life is to lean into that, to pay attention to that, and to cultivate that mindfulness of the ordinary, the adukkama sukha, so that we are able to awaken that the Dhamma is here and now. It's not in 5 minutes or next week or after the retreat's finished or last year. It's sanditiko akaliko. It's apparent here and now, ever present, timeless. It's the paccuppanna Dhamma, the here and now Dhamma. So if we want to realize the Dhamma, that means the mind has to pay attention to the present. If it's off in its imagination of what the future is going to be or what the past was like, then necessarily it can't be attuned to the Dhamma which is here and now. QED, as they say. So that the kind of primary ethic or practice of in the forest tradition training is paying attention to the present moment, the simple everyday activities, walking, standing, sitting, lying down, being with what's going on, being with what you're doing. And even though it's nothing remarkable, it's deliberately plain and simple, then that very keying of the attention into the present is the very sort of the door to the deathless. It's like that Luang Por Sumedho begins his Dhamma teachings with the doors to the deathless are open. Let those who hear demonstrate or send forth their faith, act upon their faith. Again, it's a verse from the Dhammapada. So that the doors to the deathless are open, and the door is always open here in the present. One of the things about Vedana, again, I was talking about in Luang Por's teachings here, about how that link between Vedana and Tanha is a sort of key focus of attention, the weakest link in the Paticca Samuppada. There's another of the Buddha's teachings where he maps out a causal chain. This is again in the Book of the Tens in the Anguttara Nikaya, and it starts off by saying all things are rooted in interest. So rooted in interest are all things. So having interest, putting your interest on something. Born of attention are all things. Arising from contact are all things. and then either meeting at feeling or diverging into feeling. Vedana samosarana is the Pali. So it can be diverging into feelings or converging on feelings, depending on exactly how you translate it. But it's rather like the image of a tree. I like to think of this as an image of a tree. So rooted in interest, so chanda, chanda mula, the root is an interest, chanda. That's sort of the root of the tree. And then born of attention, as the trunk of the tree rises from the ground, then born of attention are all things. Arising from contact, so the trunk of the tree is like contact, and then where the branches spread out is in the spreading of feeling, whether the you can say the branches meet the trunk or the trunk diverges into the branches. That's where things go off into feeling. So then it's a slightly different sequence than he has in dependent origination, because then he says, so diverging into feelings are all things, and then headed by concentration, dominated by mindfulness, and surmounted by wisdom. So that the world of Vedana, headed by concentration, so like when the mind is attentive, is concentrated, is focused on the present, then the fullness of the feeling is noticed. So headed by concentration, so that's like contained by concentration, dominated by mindfulness, watching how the feelings are changing and noticing their qualities, and surmounted by wisdom, so then seeing, this is impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self, that whatever the thing might be, whether it's a sight, a sound, a smell, a taste, a touch, a thought, a memory, imagination, a mood, so diverging into those feelings as Vedana, headed by concentration, dominated by mindfulness, surmounted by wisdom, and then yielding deliverance as their essence are all things. So when things are known through wisdom, in any event, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, thoughts, mood, intentions and ideas, memories and so on, when they are known with wisdom, mindfulness and wisdom, then they yield deliverance. The effect of that is the freedom of the heart. And then the last two are merging in the deathless are all things, which is amatogada is the Pali for that. Merging in the deathless are all things, and terminating in nibbana are all things. So it's another useful sequence to learn, so that it's a kind of how the realm of of contact and feeling, how that ripens when there are the skillful qualities of concentration and mindfulness and wisdom. So they're still feeling, but rather than going into tanha upadana bhava and sokaparideva dukkha domanas upayasa, so rather than the feeling when it's influenced by ignorance, then turning into craving and clinging and becoming and birth and sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, despair. Instead, when Vedana is held skillfully, when there's vichara, then those qualities of samadhi, concentration, mindfulness, wisdom, then help that experience of that feeling, pleasant feeling, painful feeling, neutral feeling. It ripens as deliverance, and there's the merging in the deathless and the realization of nibbana. So that that's a helpful little sequence to get to know. I think it's Sutta number 63. It's just after the one I was quoting this morning. So it's Book of the Tens. I won't absolutely guarantee. I think it's 63, but I'm not absolutely sure. But it's in the Book of the Tens there, and so that it's a very neat way in which it says, okay, with the realm of feeling, pleasant, painful, neutral, then with vijja, with a wholesome, skillful attitude, with awareness, then it ripens in a very different way than when it's influenced by avijja. So any thoughts, questions, comments? Yes, Anagarika Philippe.
Thank you, Ajahn. I have a question about the answer you gave to Roman. I think you said that usually upekkha is the last one on the list, and then most of the time the last one is the more refined or important.
Yeah, mostly. I mean, it's not absolutely fixed, but in many lists that the Buddha makes, the last one on the list is the most subtle or refined or the kind of intangible, that kind of quality. It's not always the case, but a lot of lists that they sort of go from the course, like the 5 khandhas. You have Rupa Khandha is the first one, and then Vijnana Khandha is the 5th one. So that it's sort of it's like a gradation, a spectrum. So it's not absolutely always the case, but very often it is the case.
Because I was wondering, but maybe it's actually not a list, but if in the Eightfold Path, that will apply as well. If like right concentration, it's right samadhi, it's more refined and more important than right view, or that's not a list, it's something which come all together. And
well, that's a very good question. I would say that's probably one of the cases where it doesn't really apply. A hole in my thesis there, but it's. I think one of the aspects of the Pali Canon is that it is kind of inconsistent. It does not always. It doesn't always match, and that, and so that. I mean, sometimes people have also said, well, isn't it strange how the Buddha starts the Eightfold Path with the wisdom faculties of right view and right intention? Wouldn't it be more sensible to start with sila and then have samadhi and then have panya at the end? But he starts off with the panya ones at the beginning. But it's also that it's often spoken about how the Eightfold Path is not just a sort of like a single run, but also how the different aspects of it support each other, so that by establishing right view at the sort of mundane right view at the beginning, and then from the wisdom faculties sort of getting the mind onto the subject in a skillful way, then sila is developed in a skillful way, and then samadhi is developed in a skillful way, and then the samadhi then supports a greater quality of wisdom, and then that wisdom then supports relating to the sila in a more skillful way. So again, in one of the teachings of in the Majjhima, you have the Buddha talking about the Eightfold Path in a mundane mode and then a supramundane mode, and so that it's speaking about the sort of the different factors of the Eightfold Path. You can relate to them in a very sort of mundane or personal or mechanistic way, and then you can also relate to them far more based on wisdom and non-attachment in a non-personal way. But it's not just like, I wouldn't say it's just like 2 turns of the wheel, but rather you can develop that in many different ways. Also, similarly, in the teaching in the Majjhima, the Buddha picks out right view, right effort, and right mindfulness as 3 particular kind of special qualities of the Eightfold Path, and saying those 3 circle around and support all the others, and they have a particularly important role to play. So it's like many aspects of the teaching, and I found this very, very helpful with the approach Luang Por Sumedho have had over the years, is rather than sort of just going to a particular explanation or a textbook, to pick up these sort of lists or particular principles and then explore them in your own practice. And to consider, well, how does that work? Or, is that, I think of it that way, but is that the whole story? Or this teaching seems to speak about it a bit differently. So how does that work together? So you're really digging into those principles and seeing how they work and getting a feeling for your own mind, your own life, how they operate. So, okay, so what's mundane right view, and then what's supramundane right view? How would that be? What's the kind of implication of that? How do I feel that. And again, as I said a few times, sometimes when you start to look at particular terms, like talking about upekkha, say, well, yeah, it doesn't quite make sense to me. I can't quite get a feeling for that. And so if it is that way, I find it's most helpful, rather than just trying to think yourself to some kind of conclusion. Okay, well, I don't really get what that's about. I don't quite see how that works. Okay, let's just put that on the shelf for the time being. I'll get to that. I'll come back and revisit that sometime. But right now, it doesn't make sense, or I can't see how that fits together. That's not clear. So rather than just getting into a lot of doubt or overthinking things, to just say, okay, well, right now that's not really clear. I'm interested, but exactly what that's talking about, I can't quite get a feeling for it. But I'll park it for later. And then a few weeks or a few months time, then you hear things, you hear another Dhamma talk, or you see something in a sutta, and you go, oh right, that's a different way of talking about it. Did I see that before? And then it clicks in a different way. So, I found that whole approach to exploring, just getting a sense for what the particular words of the teachings, what they refer to. Like I was talking about just the word becoming. It took me years, really, to just get a feeling. What's that? What is it talking? Becoming what? It doesn't make sense. What is that? Really, several years of hearing that in talks and reflecting on it, and then before it's really took shape. Oh, it's that feeling. Oh, okay. Maybe that's it. And then you hear how it's being it's being used in a Dhamma teaching, and then you see how that kind of mental state works in your own life, and you go, okay, right, becoming, I get it. Now that makes sense. And so for me, that was 2 or 3 years probably of just that, to really get a feeling for that. So I think it's skillful in terms of like the different lists that we have, like the Eightfold Path, or how the say the 5 indriya, faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, how they work together, or the 7 factors of enlightenment, these kind of things. So are they a sequence, or do they all work together? Do they all rise at the same time, or one leads to another? How does that work? To just be able to pick things up and then explore and see how they take shape in your own mind. And then it's a real living understanding. It's a living knowledge. It's not just remembering lists, but rather you have a real sort of it's a learning that is in your bones. It's you really can know it directly. Okay, so to continue. Vedana conditions tanha. So, what is tanha? This word is translated as desire. It's when you're not aware and alert to the way things are. Then you want, or do not want. Starting from Vedana, if it's pleasurable, you want it. If it's painful, you don't want it. Then there's sensual desire, kama tanha, wanting sensory pleasures, just going around eating and drinking, listening to music, and living a very distracted life of sensual delight. We all know that, don't we? We've all also experienced bhava tanha, desire to become, ambition. I want to become enlightened. I want to become something. I want to become a success. I want to become enlightened. I want to become good. I want to become admired and respected. Or vibhava tanha, the desiring to get rid of. That's a strong one too. Let's get rid of all the unpleasant things, the bad thoughts, the bad feelings, the pain, the imperfections. We can observe these 3 kinds of desires. We can observe and reflect on them because they're objects of the mind. They're mind objects. They're not the subject. Desire is not you, in other words. You grasp desire and you become the desired. I want this and I don't want that. I want to become a success. I don't want to become a failure. I've got to get rid of these faults. So there's the grasping of desire, and then you become somebody who wants things or doesn't want things. And that's endless. When we become a person who wants things and doesn't want things, it just goes on and on and on. There's always something we want, something we don't want. If we don't watch and observe this process, our whole life is just this endless cycle of samsara going around and around, just wanting. Becoming somebody who wants something, becoming somebody who doesn't want something. And that, of course, conditions rebirth, jati. It conditions old age, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair, depression, misery, jara maranang sokapari deva domanasu payasa. To be somebody who always has to be getting something or getting rid of something is such a painful way to live. Just contemplate, what is the real suffering in your life? When you think you've suffered, what is it that you've suffered from? It was from being somebody who wants things or doesn't want things. We talk about the first noble truth, dukkha. We all have this suffering. When there's avijja, we suffer. Our life is going to be a realm of suffering. This is becoming very obvious in affluent Western Europe, places like America and Australia, affluent societies where people get very much what they want and where suffering isn't the suffering of starvation or deprivation and brutality. But in affluent countries, there's so much misery and suffering. From what? Wanting and not wanting. Because even when we get everything we want more. And there are things that we don't want. Just trying to satisfy all our desires and get everything we want is not the answer. That's not the way out of suffering. Because that process doesn't end until you see it. Until you use vijja rather than avijja. So contemplate that. This wanting and not wanting, desire and the grasping of desire. When you contemplate Vedana, then you see it's just natural. Attraction, repulsion, and neither attraction nor repulsion. It's just being sensitive. For example, these flowers in front of me, hopefully placed here, these flowers in front of me are attractive to me right now. That's just the natural way of things. There's no desire in that. If I contemplate at this moment, I don't want those flowers. There's no desire. I don't want to get rid of them either. There's no wanting or not wanting, but they're still pleasing. Their attractiveness is this way. That's Vedana. Or something ugly, like these curtains. I find them ugly. Whenever I come into this room, my mind says, those curtains are ugly. I'm not sure exactly. I can't remember. I was trying to remember what the curtains were like. 1988, that's more than 30 years ago. So, was that in the old Dhamma hall with those pale blue curtains, or was this in the sala? Hard to remember. The old Dhamma hall here that used to be the school gymnasium, they had these sort of powder blue curtains up at the that we put up on the stage. Pale blue was the sort of Amaravati colour in the early days, and they had these sort of pale blue curtains that were hung up over the stage to try and give a sort of spacious mood to the decor. But whether it was those curtains or other curtains, I can't recall. But anyway, whenever I come into this room, my mind says, those curtains are ugly, so I don't really want to look at them. But I can be aware of the displeasure when my eyes contact those curtains without desiring to get rid of them. It's just awareness of their unattractiveness. Or the wall, which is neither attractive nor unattractive, just a neutral wall. Reflecting in this way, you see that it's just the natural way of things, attraction and aversion, neither attractive nor averse. Just Vedana. Desire is what we add, like for those flowers. Oh, I really want those flowers. I want those flowers in my room. I've got to have those flowers. Or the curtains. I wish they could get rid of those curtains. They really upset me. One dwells on wanting to get rid of the curtains, wanting to grab the flowers. Of course, one doesn't even notice the wall unless something attractive or unattractive appears on it. And what about the space in the room? Space is neither attractive nor unattractive, is it? So that the comments Luang Por is making here about suffering and how easy it is to be particularly in the affluent Western countries, and it's a kind of tragic difficulty of particularly in the Western world. It's almost always the case that when the more secure and stable a country is, then the greater the levels of depression and alcoholism and drug abuse and suicide that you get. The more comfortable and sort of guaranteed and stable life is, the less physically challenging life is, then the more people are just left with their minds, and then the difficulties of just being with your own mind in a comfortable, secure, safe environment leads to extraordinary amounts of depression and drug use and alcoholism and so forth. So that it's a huge ongoing issue around the world, and so that it's just having stable countries with good economies or reliable education and medical systems and good buses and trains and such like, that doesn't guarantee happiness in any way, shape or form. And so that it's one of those tragic aspects of the world, and also one of the reasons why these kind of teachings are so helpful, so relevant, and how the Buddhist meditation is almost like tailor-made for dealing with those kind of issues. And since these talks were given, the whole mindfulness movement has grown up around the world, and a lot of that, the popularity of that and approach to dealing with these sort of what you might call first world problems of depression in particular, is because that Buddhist meditation and mindfulness has been shown to be incredibly effective in helping to deal with these kind of issues. And so that's one of the reasons why you have so many tens of thousands of books on mindfulness and programs all over the planet, is because of that kind of say physical comfort on its own and social stability on its own doesn't make us happy. And when you have everything that's secure and comfortable and predictable, and there's just you and your mind and your four walls, then for many of us as human beings, we don't know what to do with that. We can't find happiness in that physical security. And maybe just to mention while I'm talking about it, that it's kind of interesting. And you might have heard me mention this before, how it was in around about 2007 that mindfulness became sort of very heavily known around the world. And part of the reason of that was because this particular program called Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy for Depression was developed by three scientists, John Teasdale, Zindel Siegel, and Mark Williams. Zindel Siegel was at University of Toronto, Mark Williams was at Oxford, John Teasdale was at Cambridge, and together they developed this program. And speaking with John Teasdale, he told me that it was listening to a Dhamma talk by Luang Por Sumedho that gave him the initial inspiration for that. Luang Por was giving a talk at the Buddhist group in the university, and John Teasdale was there listening to him. And Luang Por made two particular points, which was that our thoughts are not true and they're not ours. And so John Teasdale was particularly struck by those two principles, that the thoughts that we have, they're not ours, we're not the owners of them, they're not who and what we are, and they're not true, they don't tell the truth. And so he thought, now how could we introduce that? Because mindfulness-based stress reduction was already very well established since the late 70s. So he and these other collaborators were looking for ways to help extend mindfulness-based stress reduction into the treatment for depression. So they had this idea of creating this program of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, particularly to work with what they call recurrent depression, because up to that point, that if you had an episode of depression more than once, if you had an episode of depression more than once, then regardless of what treatment you had, whether it was medication, surgery, psychoanalysis, therapy, any kind of psychiatric treatment, nothing had a better than 10% cure rate. So if you had recurrent depression, then you were 90% likely to continue to have episodes of depression. If it was just one episode on its own, then it seemed to be more curable. But if you'd had more than one episode, then the best cure rate was 10%. So between 5 and 10%. No treatment had a better than 10% success rate. When they ran this program, first of all here in the UK, they had a 50% success rate. And so apparently the initial reaction to that was, this is rubbish, you can't be 500% better than everybody else, you fudged your results, this is fraud, it can't be true, this is ridiculous. And without any medication, just with this mental treatment, so this mind training approach. So then they did the study again with a whole different population of people in the USA. They got the same result of a 50% recovery rate. And so that's when the interest in mindfulness started going through the roof, because people thought, wow, this is incredible. This is nothing in the last 100 years has had a good effect like this. So not trying to blow Luang Por Sumedho's trumpet, saying too much, but I think credit where it's due, that that was a very significant insight. And it's not just in terms of the mental well-being of individuals. It was also interesting that the number of work days lost around the world for depression is twice as large as any other cause, like from heart disease or head injuries or hand injuries or eye injuries. So twice as many work days are lost all around the planet from depression than from any other medical condition. And so it's a huge economic issue as well as a kind of well-being issue for individuals. So that I feel is one of the incredible blessings of Buddhist. I'm obviously blowing our own trumpet. That one of the great blessings of Buddhist meditation is that by looking and exploring what the roots of suffering are, then even when you've got a very comfortable and predictable and stable living situation, where sort of cradle to grave social care and food supply and stable government and so forth, that you're able to work with your mind. You have tools to work with the mind to find qualities of well-being and happiness that are so hard to find and so tragically evade people, so that they end up with these deep states of depression and struggling with various kinds of addiction. So I will leave it there for today. It's gone past 7 o'clock already, so I'll stop at that point.